You are about to witness a brilliant queen sacrifice, as well as all the ingredients I used to cook up such a masterful attack. Granted, I'm no chess master, but I was playing someone rated several hundred elo above me. This person plays mostly bullet, they're rated 2200 in bullet, but only 1800 in blitz. And then I beat them, and they fell 200 points. So how did this happen? I went into a Trompowsky, which is a new opening that I've been trying to learn. Bishop g5, the idea is often do you take and trade off and damage the opponent's pawn structure, or do you keep your bishop? Here my opponent plays e6 immediately, so I'm like, alright, let me just play developing moves. And here, I try and apply more pressure to the pinned piece, right? This piece is pinned to the queen. My opponent says, no, we're gonna deal with that immediately. And I decide to liquidate anyway because I know that now that I've traded off my dark square bishop, I'm already setting up a pawn structure on the dark squares at some point, and that happens here. So I now have a pawn structure on the dark squares to compensate for my dark square bishop being traded off. And my opponent fianchettos their light square bishop, which applies pressure on this super long diagonal. But I have to be aware of my plan. Am I going to castle short, or am I going to castle long? Because if I castle short, I need to make sure that at least one of these pieces are going to be defending this f3 square at any given time, because I do not want to be in a scenario where I have to take with the g-pawn and open up my king if I've already castled short. Instead, I play queen c2, which gives me the flexibility to castle short or long. After my opponent develops, I play h4, and this is just an idea, you know, maybe I'm going to go for something like this, but my opponent kicks the idea out immediately, and I castle long, which does have a weak diagonal, and my opponent tries to punish me for this immediately. They play queen f4 check, I scoot over, and they pin my queen to my king. You might be panicking, but I found a very resourceful bishop d3, and from here, instead of taking my bishop and trading this off, they decided I'm going to go win a pawn. So my opponent is now up a pawn, but I blitzed out rook h to g1. And yes, the computer thinks it's a blunder, but it is only a blunder because bishop e4 is this nice juicy fork, which is guaranteed to win material. And that's fine. I missed a fork, it happens. You know, this thing's supposed to help me remember to look for forks. Didn't do its job. But the idea of rook hg1 is that I might have lost a pawn, but in reality, I'm thanking my opponent for opening a new line of attack on their king. And from here, they bring their knight, and I hit their queen with tempo. There's 3 locations they can go: queen d5, queen f4, and queen h5. Which of these squares makes the most sense? If we flip the board, you're black now. What are you thinking? I'm thinking the next move from white is rook d to g1 no matter what. So how can I deal with all this pressure coming my way? Well, I would probably try and play queen h5 and just make sure that my king has as many defenders as possible. And maybe even king h8 coming up, just anything to start dealing with those issues. However, my opponent says, nope, I'm gonna play queen d5 and get away from the protection of my king. So rook d to g1 comes, and they defend with this interesting move, knight h5, which has 2 purposes. Yes, they're defending g7, but they're also attacking my rook, because if they get the rook off, then, you know, dealing with 1 rook versus 2 rooks, very, very different. But instead of immediately reacting, I play bishop e4 first. And bishop e4 is taking a page out of Gotham Chess's book, hitting my opponent with danger levels, because I'm not just hitting their queen, I'm also hitting their rook, by the way. And after the queen moves, I have a decision to make. Do I take this rook, or do I save my rook? How does the position change, and what are the quality of pieces that are being traded? And right now, I have all this great pressure, but if I take and they take, I take and they take, how does this position compare to the one we were just in? I have a queen and rook, but so do they. And my attack has essentially dissolved, and their king is much, much safer now. Their queen doesn't need to be defending, right? If you look at that compared to this position where I can scoot back, now I still have my bishop and rook, and they still have their rook in the corner and their knight on the rim of the board. So naturally, I figured rook g3 to g2 is the move, and that's why I play. They get their rook out of danger, but that gives me time to play queen e2, which applies pressure to this knight, which is already defended once, but we'll see what happens. And after rook d7, I unleash the queen sacrifice, a full Botez gambit, because after my opponent spends literally 0 seconds, 2 minutes and 13 seconds. Are you ready for this? We played a 3-2 game, which means we start with 3 minutes and every move gets you 2 bonus seconds. 213 to 215. He literally spent 0 seconds to snap take my queen, and that allowed me to unleash the full effect of the remove the defender tactic, right? I removed the knight. What was the knight guarding? G7. Rook takes G7. King H8. Rook H7 mate. Everyone left participates in the mating attack, and even though white has no queen, it is GG. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you learned anything or got any enjoyment out of it, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe. See you in the next one. Happy learning, everyone.